Hi, this is Jelle from Growing Bonsai. I am a big fan of Japanese maples. I always want to know how do I propagate these and how do you create more of this. And as we are in the middle of spring, the branches are now at an ideal time to take cuttings off. I've decided to make a video. I'll show you how I take cuttings of Japanese maple, particularly of an Arakawa maple. And I will show you the outcome of a cutting that I took last year. So you know, yes, this technique has been used before, it does work, and if I try it, there's a good chance that I also am successful in taking cuttings. Of course, it's important that you wash off the soap quite well. You don't want the soap to stay on these leaves all that long. So if you do this and you use soap water, make sure you wash well and you wash immediately when you're ready with taking the cuts. So we're now ready to start rooting our cuttings. For this I use a rooting hormone that comes in the form of a jelly, and I prefer to not put the cuttings directly in the pot. So I'm putting some of the jelly here on a container lid. Next to this I have a pot with substrate consisting of cocoa husk. I don't know how this will root. I've never used this for cuttings before, and this is an extruded glass substrate. I need to look up the exact name because, to be honest, it fails me right now. I'll put it on top in text after I'm done. Of course, I've got my cuttings and then I've got my secret weapon, and I'll get to that in a second. Now, how do we go ahead and take cuttings? And the basic premise is not all that difficult. This is an Arakawa maple. This was the cutting last year. This year it looks like this. It was grown exceptionally well last year. This whole branch was grown over the last growing season. So the technique I'm showing you here is the technique I used to grow this cutting. So we have a cutting here. And effectively what we want to use as a cutting, as a base, we want no leaves in the ground. The growing tip itself I also do not want to have in there, and I take it off. So what we're left with is a cutting with two leaves. I'm clipping it off here at the node. This is the place where rooting occurs most easily. By cutting it off here, rooting occurs easily, but also there is two little buds on each side. So when at some point I want to cut the rooting back all the way to the roots, I can clip it here, once established of course, and then new branches will come out on the side. So we take the scissors, we clip it off at the node, we dip in the jelly, poke a hole, push the cutting in, and make sure it stays a little bit above the ground. Now do this another 50 times and fill the pots. This is an interesting one. This is an old branch that I removed, but this is new growth. So I'm going to clip this one at the base here, split them, put them in the jelly, and get them planted. As said before, I am using young branches for this, all this year's growth. There is a reason for it. This young, immature growth still needs to diversify some of the cells, and as such they're more capable of growing roots than the somewhat older plants. The reason that I'm removing quite a bit of the foliage is because foliage loses water. It transpires water, and with that it is harder for the cutting to take. So the success rate of taking cuttings in this way depends on a few factors. One of which of course is how much water is in the cuttings when you are taking these cuttings. This is one of the reasons why I have put these in water and I'm keeping them in water, but also why I'm now working in the shade out of the wind rather than somewhere in the garden. The other is the position and the aftercare. So all these cuttings, for me, they go into the shade. I do not want these cuttings to be exposed to full sunlight other than maybe early morning or late evening sunlight. But during the day I do not want these plants to experience any sunlight, because that would immediately heat up the pot and cook the cuttings. Of course, another part of the aftercare is how do you plant them after you've done this? How do you then continue? Well, step one is of course watering them. Watering at this point serves two purposes. One is of course getting the soil hydrated. The second is what you see here. It basically pushes down the substrate so the stems of the cuttings really connect to the soil. Having drained the pots, I now use these plastic sandwich baggies to plant the tree in. This is also an iffy job to do, because it's very easy to pull the cuttings back out of the pot. So I'll go slow and be gentle and hope I don't pull any of them out. Beware of the leaves. Just sliding it up. And what we've created here is a mini greenhouse. I close the bag and effectively I now have a tiny incubator for my cuttings. I'll put this somewhere under a bench and I'll tie the bag up so it doesn't fall over in a big gust of wind. And over the next 8 weeks I'll just leave it alone. Every once in a while I'll check whether water is needed, but besides that I don't do anything. I'm also not going to try whether the cuttings have rooted by pulling on them or anything silly like that. If they root, they root. If they die, I'll see that they die. Anything in between, I'll just let it do its thing. Time for the other one, we'll do the same thing. This of course also explains why I use round pots and not a large cutting or seedling tray. This way, on the one hand, the pot fits nicely in this bag. On the other hand, it also reduces the spread of diseases. So this tree was repotted in early spring, and so far I've just let it grow. And as you can tell from the branches, it has been growing quite well. It is now time to prune it back, and at the same time I will take some cuttings. Taking cuttings of Japanese maple, there are two main times to do it. The first is in fall, when the tree has dropped all the leaves, and those are called hardwood cuttings. The second one, the type that I'm taking right now, is called softwood cuttings, and they are in early spring. As you might be able to tell, I moved back into the greenhouse. The wind outside was just too much for working on this tree. The lower branches are typically weaker than the upper branches. That also means something for taking cuttings. Although the lower branches have short internodes, which is really good for bonsai, and if you don't know why this is good for bonsai, let me know in the comments and I'll do a little video on the internode length and why short internodes are good for bonsai. But the upper ones are stronger. They have longer internode length, which is a bad thing for bonsai, but they have a lot of stored energy and they will in generally root better, quicker and grow up faster. So when taking cuttings, it is important to take cuttings mainly from the upper part of the canopy. On this maple I do have some aphids, so when taking cuttings it's important that you don't include the aphids in your cuttings. So I've prepared this little container. In it is water and soap and rubbing alcohol, and this I will use to make sure that there's no living aphids left on the cuttings before I plant them up. Working in the greenhouse has one big benefit. Outside it is not all that warm, but here temperatures have risen and I would say it's probably about 22, 23 degrees. So I've taken off my jacket, enjoying spring weather. I hope you also have the chance to do that. As you notice, I'm already taking out the tips of the plants that I might take cuttings of. The reason that I do that is because the tips are generally too weak and they have a lot of aphids, so I'm just clipping those off. For the final cuttings I only need a few leaves, so I'm not concerned with keeping everything that is on the tree. So with that, this video is done. I wish you lots of luck taking cuttings of your Japanese maple. Drop me a line and let me know whether you were successful, and see you next time. Maybe next time I'll show you the rooted cuttings.